My name is Bobby Carnegi. I'm the Branch Secretary of the Queensland Branch of the Maritime Union. We cover approximately 2,000 members in the state of Queensland, a huge state. It's 2.5 times the size of Texas. It's 3 times the size of California. But I really want to greet you, wonderful fellow workers who are there today on your battle and the talks you're having about this huge, the number one issue that faces longshoremen, faces maritime workers, and in fact faces workers in organised labour right throughout the Western developed world, and that's the battle with automation and how it's utilised and how it is being used to destroy the basic tenets of the organised labour movement around the world. We should make no mistake about the fact that automation isn't there for the assistance of workers, despite what the employer may say. Automation is there and is being implemented to destroy jobs and to destroy union jobs. And it is we have seen it utilised in my major port here in Queensland, in Brisbane. Brisbane's a port that has 3 major container operators. We have the giant Asian, the biggest container operator in the world, Hutchison, which is started off in Hong Kong and now has spread its arms, its octopus-like arms all around the world, except in the US. Last year, Hutchison handled over 90 million containers. We also have DP World, which is one of the top 5 terminal operators in the world, and we have an Australian independent called Patrick's, which is very famous for its union busting activities in 1998. We have the highest level of automation of any single port, I believe, in the world in Brisbane. Patrick's is an automated terminal. DP World is semi-automated, and Hutchison's are semi-automated terminals. And as I said before, there's only 1 million containers a year goes through Brisbane, so they eat each other alive for competition. What it's created in our port is increased casualisation. It is seeing, although we're fighting it very hard, it is seeing maintenance offshored. It is seeing this continual battle to keep longshore work and jurisdiction within in longshore areas. And it's an area, although we've fought hard, is that it's an area that, in my opinion, is that my union didn't have a proper long-term strategy at the start of it. And what's happened is that continually the employer has the upper hand in the automation area, and I can't speak more strongly that any longshore person who is there in the audience today is that you must, one, not allow automation for automation's sake. Automation tends only to, the only person who profits from automation, the only group that profits from automation is the terminal operator and the ship owner. The people who pay for automation are the workers and the state, because they get massive subsidies from and grants from the state, federal and local, and workers who are displaced by the automation. It's got nothing really to do with productivity whatsoever. The second thing that you must do is that you must make sure that wherever it raises its head, whether it's semi-automation or automation, is that you must make sure that the jurisdictional areas are completely covered, and not just in the terminal itself, outside the terminal. And I think this is a key area for all longshore workers these days, is that if we're not careful, right around the world, we're just going to end up with pockets of fairly well-paid workers in tiny little numbers in automated terminals that will employ only a tiny fraction of the workforces that they do now even. And What we're facing, in my opinion, if we don't tackle this issue correctly, is that we're going to tackle an issue that is far more devastating for longshore workers than containerisation was in the early 1960s and mid 60s, when we went from bulk and general cargo to containerised cargo in terminals, which saw hundreds of thousands of longshoremen around the world displaced. Automation is slower, but it is profoundly more dangerous, because once the terminals operate, even though they may be far less productive than a non-automated terminal, the terminal operators fall in love with them, and they will not. Once they automate, they never go back to having a proper workforce. They would much rather deal with robots than deal with real people. So that's just some advice that I have from my area of expertise, but if you could call it that. But it's absolutely vital that the rank and file and each local is involved right through all discussions with the terminal operators and the ship owners, because if they're not, what happens is that we start hearing these sounds which have been wrong. That even a section of the left you will hear it, where they say, we'll make automation work for us. Well, I'm afraid it's very hard to make a robot work for your conditions, for the betterment of your conditions and life. What is needed is an absolutely radical rethink of what the working day and working hours is, and about how the ship owner and the terminal operator, it's not a matter of paying better redundancies. Redundancies are the easiest thing in the world for any union leader to negotiate, because you're negotiating away a job for life. What we have to do is negotiate to make sure that longshore men and women are not eliminated out of their industry entirely, and that's the big challenge. How we do it is that we have to. I really believe that we have to make certain stands. It's our industry. It's the workers in the industry are the ones that created the massive profits for these. On the west coast, the PMA, and on the east coast, the great terminal operators and the ship owners. What they have to be forced into is that they simply can't go and automate terminals with disregard for the workforce. That if for some reason that we can't stop the automation has to be handled in such a way that there's not a displacement of work. So what we have to do is make sure that everything in maintenance and what other areas is done, or in areas where workers need to be retrained, they must be retrained, and up to and including university level. That we cannot allow these monolithic ship owner terminal operators like Maersk to come into our territory and simply destroy 100 years of trade unionism. As an Australian, I'm inspired by the great history of the ILWU. For the last 80 years, it's been a bulwark against tyranny around this world, and we really need to make sure that this round of automation is handled much differently than the containerisation revolution, so that the displacement of workers doesn't happen. Is that the ship owner and the terminal operator have to pay for it. They have to pay for it in the sense of job redesign and job reduction of hours and all that goes along with that rather than paying workers to leave an industry. Paying workers to leave an industry is a disaster. You only have to talk to any trade union or any workers leader who's worth his or her has any social conscience knows that the great majority of workers, when they're paid out redundancies, all it is in the main it lasts a couple of years and then there's nothing. They might have a small pension to fall back on, and their working lives are ruined. So for the great majority of people, redundancy isn't a solution. Work is what we're about, and work is what we should demand. It's our industry. It's not the ship owners. Steve.
And has there been a fight for a shorter work week, a 6-hour day, for example?
Well, this is one of the perplexing things. We in Queensland with the last round of negotiations at DP World, they negotiated a shorter working week, and at Patrick's they negotiated a shorter working week, but that was more to do a shorter working year, but that was more to do with trying to stop job losses over the global financial crisis rather than automation. But what the demand has to be, I think a 6-hour day doesn't even hit the mustard anymore, Steve. I really believe that workers have to be looking at like a maximum of a 28-hour working week, absolute maximum. 4 7-hour shifts or something like that as an absolute maximum. We have to also demand the fact that at times in the longshore industry there becomes a love of overtime and a love of what we call the earn or the productivity bonuses and whatever comes into it. And I really think that what we have to do is have a long look at ourselves as rank and filers and as leaders and say that the time has come where we really have to protect our jobs, because if we lose these jobs, there's not going to be any work for our sons and for other workers and daughters who want to follow us into our industry that we're so proud of. Internationalism is fundamentally the most important aspect of the dock worker's life and of a worker's life generally, but particularly on the docks, because we handle, there was a book written very recently called 90% of Everything. 90% of everything we wear, everything we drive, everything we have in our homes comes across the docks on either a 20-foot or a 40-foot container. And that's right throughout the world. And so that gives us an enormous power at the pointed end of the capitalist production chain. But that also that gives us great power, but it also puts us under great spotlight by employers. So wherever dock workers are well organised, dock workers will come under attack for the simple reason of our ability to choke the capitalist supply chain. So the only way dock workers can truly defend themselves is by internationalism. And the great example of that in my working life, which has spanned over 40 years, has been in 1998. I was very heavily involved in I acted as the go-between with the ILWU Coast Committee and Locals 13 and 63 in Los Angeles and Long Beach about the Columbus, Canada. And if it wasn't for the wonderful internationalism of the ILWU, I wouldn't be able to be speaking to you, wonderful fellow workers, today, because the Maritime Union of Australia would not be in existence. There would be scabs would be running the Australian waterfront. That's how important the Columbus, Canada dispute was to the whole winning of defeating Corrigan's attempt to turn the Australian waterfront non-union in the Patrick's Dispute of 98. The ILWU holding out and refusing to cross the community picket line for 17 days was the key to the dispute being at least forced into a settlement. Without that, as I said before, I certainly wouldn't be sitting behind my desk at 6 in the morning talking to you good people. I'd probably be tramping the streets unemployed. And since I was elected into this position in 2015, and since I've got involved heavily in the International Dock Workers Council, is that once again in my working life, the IDC is the finest international working class organisation I've been associated with it, because it is a flat, non-bureaucratic structure. It has a bureaucracy of 1.5 people, the secretariat of one person, and Geordie Agwande, who works half-time with the IDC and half-time as a rank-and-file dock worker in Barcelona. Every time that the IDC goes into action, it calls upon the finest in all of us, and that is that an injury to one of us is an injury to all of us, and that is the only way that workers, and dock workers in particular, are going to survive the next decades and the next years and decades ahead, is through internationalism. If they touch a dock worker in Local 10, that means that they touch a dock worker in the Queensland branch of the MUA, and a dock worker in Barcelona, and a dock worker in Belgium, or a dock worker in France. And that just means that we all must learn that it is not about us, it's about all of us, and that the companies understand it. Maersk, DP World, all the big ship owners, they all understand internationalism very, very well. And we have to put it even higher on our list of priorities, because I don't have much doubt that Trump will come a-hunting for the strongest part of organised labour in the United States, which is the West and East Coast dock workers. And when he comes trying to touch use, well, dock workers around the world must realise, and we must realise that if Trump touches one dock worker on the west coast of America, he touches every dock worker in Australia and in Europe and in South America and in Canada. So that way we can win. If we all just think that we can just defeat these transnationals just by ourselves, or run to the court system and keep some lawyers very wealthy, that's not the way to do it. The only way to do it is direct action on the job worldwide, and throw the transnational shipping giants' schedules into absolute chaos. And by doing that, we'll be able to look after each other. But if we don't do it, they will pick us off one by one.